James, I'm glad you said what you said because it was something that popped out to me. I remember this, but of course I was in the military. There's a lot of things that you know and you've heard of. But when I looked at it and saw that you were both writing this, I said, I know the absolute bare minimum about this. And Jack, for you, was that something that jumped out at you, that there was so much to kind of illuminate here that other people had done? So, because I know, James says this too, you don't want to write the same thing. You don't want to write the 30th biography of Churchill. Was that something that you looked at as well when you're picking this?
It was, and James put it a lot better when we talked about it. He articulated the exact specifics about how events are kind of re-examined historically. About every 20 years, there's a book that comes out that either re-examines because something else came to light, or the experience over the past 20 years has led to different conclusions, perhaps, or something along those lines. But generally speaking, but when I made that list and went back to Beirut 1983, so not only was it a seminal event for the country and then for me as a kid, but I also knew, because as you can see behind me, I have a lot of books here, especially on military history, that there wasn't that seminal work. I couldn't name the book to read on Beirut 1983. And it was such an important event. And so that was another thing that stood out. A lot of events in history, you can say, oh, you got to read this by so-and-so, or you got to read this by so-and-so, or this is kind of the foundational work. Yes, there are others, but read this first and then this one, or something along those lines. There's at least a conversation about it. There's essentially zero on this. And so that was a part of it. And then when I talked to James, he talked about how, there are these gaps essentially. You don't want to have the seminal book on historical event X here, and then write the next one to come out the following fall or the next spring or something like that. But in this case, it was fertile ground for all of those reasons, and the recently declassified documents, and having survivors that are have enough time and distance between when the event happened and us sitting down to talk with them, that they can reflect on it. It's not going to somebody who served with someone who died in World War II or something like that, trying to get a story from a 97-year-old who's thinking back to 1944, 1945. You're talking to the actual people who were there. And then you're able to humanize it by talking to a widow or a son of someone who grew up with an empty seat at the dinner table.
Yeah, and I was going to, not only did we get such great interviews, so many of these guys had diaries, they had letters. They really had, like one of our best characters in the book. And I think for me, when going back and looking through it all, one of the most impactful characters is someone who didn't survive, but yet we had access to all his letters. And so through those letters, his story is able, in a lot of ways, you're able to resurrect his experience for readers. And so, the cooperation, a real shout out to all the Beirut vets. They were super excited to have their story told, to share their documents. Every time we did an interview with somebody, we'd say, hey, who should we talk to next? And you get a text message of all these contacts. It was like, call this person, call that person. It was just more and more and more. So, and then after Jack did the talk last year at the 40th anniversary of that reunion, and at that point we were almost done with the book. We had a draft of it. All these guys came up afterwards and were like, I'd love to talk to you about it. I've got all my letters too. And so, here we were at the end, like trying to shoehorn more information into the manuscript. And the key was to get as many voices in here as possible from as many different people, not just Beirut vets and survivors, but parents, children, things like that, because it's their book, it's their story. And we really felt very passionate about having that be the case.
Right out of the gate, James said, this is their story. Let's just get out of the way. This is what we want to do. We want to get out of the way of this thing. This isn't ours. This is theirs. And James, I don't know if you remember, maybe it was maybe a year and a couple months ago now, he sent me one email that had a letter, and then it was a scan, and then a photo. It was like a Polaroid photo. Yeah. And I remember thinking, and it was of someone who didn't, I believe it was someone who didn't make it. And I remember thinking, gosh, if I'd seen this photo in October, November, December 1983, I would have looked at it and said, oh my gosh, look how old this guy was. And then now when I see it all these years later, I think, oh my gosh, look how young this person was. Look how young all these guys were that perished or had to deal with this event. They were so young.
Yeah, 18, 19 years old, a lot of them. So young.